Your emotions are the slaves to your beliefs, and you are the slave to your emotions until you become the master of your beliefs. Neville Goddard. What if I told you that the one thing you've been trying to escape your entire life, the ache in your chest, the rising heat in your throat, the tears you've swallowed in parking lots, the rage you've buried beneath smiles, is actually the doorway to your liberation? Not the enemy, not the weakness, not the flaw, but the secret passage. You've spent years building walls against your own emotional weather. You've called some feelings good and welcomed them like honored guests. Others you've labeled bad and locked in the basement of your body, hoping they'd starve to death in the darkness. But here's what the mystics knew, and the neuroscientists are now confirming. Emotions don't die in the dark. They evolve in the dark. They grow teeth in the dark. They become monsters in the dark. Not because they were monsters to begin with, but because you refuse to look at them with the light of your awareness. There's a reason every spiritual tradition speaks of the heart as a gateway. There's a reason the ancient Egyptians weighed the heart against a feather in the underworld. There's a reason the Japanese concept of ikigai begins with emotional alignment. There's a reason the Stoics didn't say don't feel. They said don't be ruled by feeling, which is a radically different instruction. Because your emotions are not your enemy. They are your internal navigation system. They are the compass you were born with, the GPS of your soul, the quiet voice that speaks before your mind learns to lie. Think about the last time you made a decision that felt wrong in your body, but right in your head. You felt it, didn't you? That knot, that weight, that subtle contraction, and you overrode it. You overrode it with logic, with shoulds, with what other people would think, with the timeline you'd committed to, with the identity you'd built. And weeks or months later, you stood in the wreckage, wondering how you ended up here, when the truth is, you felt the warning the whole way. You just didn't want to listen. This is the great tragedy of modern existence. We have become a species that feels deeply, but trusts superficially. We have emotions, but no emotional intelligence. We have reactions, but no responses. We have triggers, but no tools. And the world has taught us this. From childhood, we were handed the message, don't cry, stop being angry, you're too sensitive, calm down, it's not that big of a deal. We were trained to distrust the very thing that makes us human. We were educated out of our own inner knowing. But here's what's beautiful, here's what's redemptive, here's what's worth waking up for. It's never too late to learn the language of your own soul. Your emotions are speaking to you right now, in this moment. As you read these words, there's something rising, something shifting, something beneath the surface of your attention. Maybe it's hope, maybe it's skepticism, maybe it's a grief you've been carrying for decades. Maybe it's a longing you've never allowed yourself to name. Whatever it is, it's real, and it's trying to tell you something. The word emotion comes from the Latin emovere, to move out, to move through. Emotions are energy in motion. They are not meant to be parked in your body like cars in a garage. They are meant to move through you, like weather through a sky, like waves through an ocean, like breath through lungs. The suffering doesn't come from the emotion itself. The suffering comes from the resistance, the holding, the gripping, the refusal to let the wave complete its journey. Imagine standing on a beach and trying to stop the tide with your hands. That's what you've been doing with your grief. That's what you've been doing with your anger. That's what you've been doing with your fear. You've been standing on the shoreline of your own humanity, palms pressed against the infinite ocean, wondering why you're exhausted, wondering why you're drowning, wondering why the water always wins. The water always wins because the water is truth, and truth cannot be stopped.
It can only be delayed, distorted, or denied, and all of those choices come at a cost. But what if there was another way? What if you could learn to surf the waves instead of fighting them? What if you could discover that the very emotions you've been running from are the fuel for the life you've been dreaming of? What if your sensitivity isn't a weakness, but a superpower? What if your tears aren't a breakdown, but a breakthrough? What if your anger isn't a sin, but a signal? What if your fear isn't a failure, but a friend? This isn't poetry. This is physics. This is biology. This is spirituality. This is psychology. This is the convergence of every wisdom tradition and every scientific discovery about what it means to be fully, authentically, vibrantly alive. The secret power of your emotions is not that they feel good all the time. The secret power is that they are always true. They never lie. They never manipulate. They never gaslight. Your mind can lie to you. Your ego can lie to you. Your conditioning can lie to you. But your emotions, they are the honest messenger of your soul. They are the underground river that flows beneath all your stories, all your identities, all your defenses. And when you learn to listen to them, really listen, without judgment, without resistance, without trying to fix or change them, they become your greatest guide. There's a reason the most spiritually advanced beings in history were also the most emotionally alive. Jesus wept. Buddha sat with suffering. Rumi dissolved in longing. The Dalai Lama laughs with his whole body. Emotional repression is not enlightenment. Emotional repression is survival. And you were not born to merely survive. You were born to feel the full spectrum of this miraculous, heartbreaking, ecstatic, terrifying, beautiful thing called being human. So here we are, at the beginning of a journey into the most intimate landscape you will ever explore, the landscape of your own emotional life. This is not a journey for the faint of heart. It requires courage. It requires honesty. It requires a willingness to meet parts of yourself you've abandoned, exiled, or forgotten. But I promise you this, on the other side of that meeting is freedom. Not the freedom of never feeling pain again. That's numbness, not freedom. But the freedom to feel pain without being destroyed by it. The freedom to feel anger without becoming it. The freedom to feel fear without fleeing from it. The freedom to feel joy without waiting for the other shoe to drop. The freedom to be fully, messily, gloriously human. And that freedom is your birthright. The question is not whether you're emotional enough. The question is whether you're brave enough to stop running, turn around, and face what you've been fleeing your entire life. The answer to that question will determine everything.
There is a lie that has been whispered into the human psyche for thousands of years. It has been carved into religious doctrine, baked into cultural norms, and passed down through generations like an heirloom nobody asked for. The lie is this, that your emotions are untrustworthy, that they are primitive, that they are the enemy of reason, the opponent of progress, the weakness that must be overcome. And like all great lies, it contains a fragment of truth, just enough to make it believable. Yes, emotions can overwhelm you. Yes, unchecked feelings can lead to destructive decisions. Yes, raw reaction without reflection can burn bridges and ruin lives. But these are not the fault of the emotions themselves. These are the consequences of emotional illiteracy. These are the results of a culture that teaches you to suppress rather than understand, to control rather than befriend, to fear rather than honor the very forces that make you alive. Let us now descend into the deeper architecture of this territory. Let us explore the core themes and concepts that will transform your relationship with your emotional life from one of warfare to one of wisdom. The illusion of positive and negative emotions.
The first concept to dismantle is the binary framework you've been carrying since childhood. Somewhere along the way, you absorb the idea that certain emotions are good and others are bad. Joy, good. Gratitude, good. Love, good. Anger, bad. Sadness, bad. Fear, bad. But here's what the mystics understood and what the cutting-edge neuroscientists are now proving. Emotions themselves are neutral. They are neither positive nor negative. They are simply information. They are data from your nervous system about your relationship to your environment, your experiences, your needs, your boundaries, your values. Think of your emotions as the dashboard of a vehicle. When a red light appears on your car's dashboard, do you call that light negative? Do you try to suppress it? Do you smash the dashboard with a hammer because you don't like what it's telling you? Of course not. You understand that the light is information. It's telling you something about the state of the vehicle. The light itself is not the problem, it's the messenger. The problem is whatever is causing the light to appear. Your emotions work the same way. Fear is not the enemy. Fear is the messenger telling you that you perceive a threat to your safety or well-being. Anger is not the enemy. Anger is the messenger telling you that a boundary has been violated or an injustice has occurred. Sadness is not the enemy. Sadness is the messenger telling you that you have experienced a loss that matters to you. Even what we call negative emotions like jealousy, shame, or guilt are messengers carrying important information about your values, your relationships, your sense of self. The suffering begins when you attack the messenger, when you try to suppress the fear, deny the anger, or numb the sadness. You don't solve the underlying issue. You simply silence the voice that's trying to guide you. And like any silenced voice, it will find another way to be heard, louder, more persistent, often through the body, through illness, through burnout, through explosive outbursts that seem to come from nowhere, but actually come from everywhere you've been ignoring. The invitation here is radical. Stop judging your emotions. Stop dividing them into good and bad. Start seeing them as what they are, sacred communication from the deepest part of you. The seen and the unseen, emotions as invisible architecture. You cannot see the wind, but you can see the trees bend. You cannot see gravity, but you can feel its pull. You cannot see a radio wave, but you can hear the music it carries. Your emotions are the invisible architecture of your life. They shape your decisions, your relationships, your health, your creativity, your capacity for joy. And yet most people live entirely unaware of how these invisible forces are directing their existence. Consider this. Every decision you've ever made that felt truly right came with a certain emotional signature, a sense of expansion, a feeling of alignment, a quiet knowing in your body that said yes before your mind could construct the reasons. And every decision you've ever made that felt wrong, even when it looked right on paper, came with a different signature, contraction, heaviness, a knot in the stomach, a subtle but persistent no that you overrode with logic. This is not coincidence. This is design. You are designed with an internal guidance system more sophisticated than any technology humanity has ever created. Your emotional responses are that system's output. They are the visible evidence of invisible truths about your alignment with your own deepest nature. The ancient Hermetic tradition spoke of the principle of correspondence, as above, so below, as within, so without. Your emotional life is the within, your external reality is the without, and they are always, always in correspondence. The chaos you feel internally will manifest as chaos externally. The peace you cultivate internally will manifest as peace externally. The unprocessed grief you carry will shape your relationships, your work, your health, whether you're aware of it or not. This is why emotional mastery is not some esoteric luxury for monks and mystics. It is the most practical work you will ever do. Because when you transform the unseen architecture, the seen world cannot help but transform in response. Control versus surrender, the dance of mastery. Here is a paradox that sits at the heart of all emotional wisdom. You cannot control your emotions, but you can master them, and mastery looks nothing like control. Control is the attempt to dominate, suppress, or eliminate. Control says, "I will not feel this." Control tightens the muscles, holds the breath, builds the walls. Control is the fist clenched against the tide. Surrender is the attempt to receive, allow, and learn from. Surrender says, "I will feel this, and I will let it teach me." Surrender softens the belly, deepens the breath, opens the gates. Surrender is the palm turned upward to receive the rain. But here's what most people misunderstand. Surrender is not passivity. Surrender is not giving up. Surrender is the most active form of engagement possible because it requires you to stay present with experience rather than fleeing into distraction, numbing, or denial. Think of the difference between a small tree in a hurricane and a deep-rooted oak in a storm. The small tree tries to resist, stands rigid, fights every gust, and eventually snaps. The deep-rooted oak surrenders, bends with the wind, allows the force to move through it, and remains standing when the storm passes. This is emotional mastery, not rigidity, flexibility, not resistance, reception, not control, conscious surrender. The Stoics understood this. They didn't say, "Don't feel." They said, "You cannot control what happens to you, but you can control how you respond to what happens to you." And that response begins with how you relate to your own emotional experience. Do you meet your fear with more fear? Fear of the fear itself? That's the path to anxiety disorders and panic attacks. Or do you meet your fear with presence, allowing it to be there without adding another layer of resistance? The choice is yours in every moment.
The neuroscience of feeling, what modern science confirms. While the mystics have been saying these things for millennia, modern neuroscience is now providing the empirical confirmation. And what it reveals is both fascinating and liberating. Your brain is not one unified thing. It's more like a committee of different systems that evolved at different times for different purposes. The oldest part, your reptilian brain, handles basic survival functions. The limbic system, your mammalian brain, is the seat of emotion and memory. The neocortex, your human brain, is responsible for logic, language, and conscious thought. Here's the crucial insight. Your emotional brain processes information faster than your thinking brain. By the time your conscious mind becomes aware of a situation, your emotional brain has already evaluated it and initiated a response. This is why you feel before you think. This is why you get a gut feeling before you can articulate why. This is why emotions seem to come from nowhere, because by the time you're aware of them, they've already arrived. But here's what the neuroscience also reveals. While you cannot stop the initial emotional response, that's automatic, you can influence what happens next. Through a process called emotional regulation, you can learn to pause between the feeling and the reaction, to choose your response rather than being controlled by your impulses. This is not suppression. This is conscious engagement. This is the neocortex learning to communicate with the limbic system, not to silence it, but to partner with it. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself throughout life, means that every time you practice emotional awareness, every time you choose presence over reaction, every time you befriend rather than fight your feelings, you are literally building new neural pathways. You are physically reshaping your brain toward greater emotional intelligence. This is not magic. This is biology responding to experience. This is science confirming what the sages have always known. How you relate to your inner world shapes who you become. The energy body. Emotions as energy in motion. Before we leave this section, we must touch on a concept that bridges psychology and spirituality. Emotions as energy in motion. Every emotion carries a specific energetic signature,
Anger is hot, fast, upward moving. Sadness is cool, slow, downward moving. Fear is cold, contracted, inward moving. Love is warm, expansive, outward moving. These are not metaphors, these are felt experiences in the body. And when you learn to work with emotions as energy rather than as problems to solve, everything shifts. The question is no longer, why am I feeling this? Though that question has its place. The question becomes, where is this energy in my body and what does it need in order to move? Because energy that doesn't move becomes stagnant. Emotions that don't flow become trapped. And trapped emotions become physical tension, chronic pain, illness, depression, anxiety. The body keeps the score, as the saying goes. The body remembers every feeling you couldn't feel, every tear you wouldn't cry, every scream you swallowed. But here's the good news. What was trapped can be released. What was frozen can be thawed. What was silenced can be given voice. Not through force, not through willpower, but through presence, through attention, through the simple act of allowing what's there to be there until it's ready to move on its own. This is the deeper meaning of the word emotion, energy in motion. Your emotions want to move. They want to flow through you and complete their journey. Your job is not to hold them forever. Your job is not to suppress them permanently. Your job is simply to get out of their way, to stop damming the river with your resistance, to let the water find its natural course, to trust that what moves through you will not destroy you, that in it will, in fact, make you more alive. These are the core themes and concepts that form the foundation of emotional mastery. The illusion of positive and negative emotions, the seen and unseen architecture of your life, the dance between control and surrender, the neuroscience that confirms ancient wisdom, the understanding of emotions as energy in motion. Each of these concepts is a key, and together they form a set of keys that can unlock doors you didn't even know you'd closed, doors behind which your vitality, your freedom, your authentic self have been waiting. But concepts alone are not enough. They are maps, but you must walk the territory. They are recipes, but you must enter the kitchen. They are blueprints, but you must build. And so we will continue, deeper now, into the realm where concepts become stories, where principles become parables, where the abstract becomes achingly, beautifully real.
There was once a woman who lived at the edge of a great ocean. Every day, she would walk to the shore and stand where the waves met the sand. And every day, she would feel the same ache in her chest, a longing she could not name, a sadness she could not place, a grief that seemed to belong to someone else but lived inside her like a permanent resident. She tried everything to make it leave. She traveled to distant mountains and sat with monks who spoke of emptiness. She read books by wise men and women who promised liberation through understanding. She built a successful career, surrounded herself with people who admired her, created a life that looked from the outside like something worth envying, but the ache remained. It was there when she woke in the middle of the night. It was there when she laughed with friends. It was there in the shower, in the car, in the moments between moments when nothing was demanding her attention and she had to face the quiet. One day, exhausted from running, she walked to the ocean and did something she had never done before. Instead of standing at the edge, she walked into the water. Instead of trying to escape the ache, she turned toward it. Instead of asking, "How do I make this stop?" she asked a different question. "What are you trying to tell me?" And in that moment, standing in the cold, salt water up to her waist, she heard something that was not a voice, but felt like one. It said, "I am not your enemy. I am your memory. I am every tear you didn't cry when you were told to be strong. I am every word you swallowed when you were told to be quiet. I am every truth you buried
when you were told it would hurt too much to speak. I am not here to destroy you. I am here to be witnessed. I am here to be held. I am here to be released. She stood in the ocean and wept, not the way she had wept before, quickly, quietly, apologetically. She wept the way the sky weeps in a thunderstorm, fully, unashamedly, without holding back. She wept for the little girl who learned to hide. She wept for the teenager who learned to perform. She wept for the woman who learned to succeed at the cost of her own soul. And when the tears were finished, something shifted. The ache was still there, but it was different now. It had softened. It had loosened. It was no longer a knot in her chest, but a current moving through her, connected to something larger than herself. She understood in that moment that her grief was not hers alone. It was the grief of her mother and her grandmother and all the women before her who had learned to swallow their truth. It was the grief of a culture that had forgotten how to feel. It was the grief of being human in a world that worships numbness and calls it strength. And she understood something else. By allowing herself to feel it, really feel it, without resistance, without judgment, without trying to fix it, she was not only healing herself, she was healing a line that stretched back generations. She was releasing something that had been trapped in her bloodline, waiting for someone brave enough to let it move. She walked out of the ocean different than she walked in, not because the ache was gone, but because she had stopped fighting it. And in stopping the fight, she had found something she'd been seeking her whole life without knowing it. Peace. Not the peace of no feeling, but the peace of allowing feeling to be what it is. This is the first parable, but there is another. There was once a man who built his life on the foundation of control. He controlled his diet, his schedule, his environment, his relationships. He controlled his emotions with an iron grip, never too happy, lest he become vulnerable to disappointment, never too sad, lest he appear weak, never too angry, lest he reveal the fire beneath the ice. He was admired for his discipline. He was respected for his composure. He was promoted, praised, and held up as an example of what was possible when a person mastered themselves. But at night, alone in his apartment, he felt nothing. Not peace, just nothing. A vast, empty plain where his heart used to be. A silence so complete it terrified him more than any feeling ever could. He went to doctors. They found nothing wrong. He went to therapists. They gave him exercises. He went to retreats. They taught him to meditate. But the nothing remained. A void where his emotional life should have been. A desert where a garden once grew. One day, exhausted from running, he walked to the ocean and did something he had never done before. Instead of standing at the edge, he walked into the water. Instead of trying to escape the ache, he turned toward it. Instead of asking, "How do I make this stop?" he asked a different question. "What are you trying to tell me?" And in that moment, standing in the cold, salt water up to his waist, he heard something that was not a voice, but felt like one. It said, "The feelings you've been holding the door closed for so long that you've forgotten there's a door at all." He didn't understand, but something in him cracked just slightly. She continued, "The feelings you've been running from are not outside you. They are not in your past. They are not in the people who hurt you. They are here, now, in this room, in this body, waiting. They have always been waiting. They will always be waiting, because they cannot leave until you let them in." "But I don't feel anything," he said. "That's the problem." She smiled, not cruelly, but with a tenderness that broke something else in him. "You don't feel anything because you have become an expert at not feeling, but the not feeling is itself a feeling. The numbness is itself an emotion. It is the feeling of having abandoned yourself. It is the feeling of having made a treaty with your own destruction." She reached across the table and took his hand. Her skin was warm, papery, alive.
"There is a fire inside you," she said. "You have been smothering it for decades because you were afraid it would burn you. But a fire that is smothered does not go out. It turns to smoke. And that smoke has been filling your lungs, your mind, your life. The numbness is the smoke. The emptiness is the smoke. The nothing is the smoke." "What do I do?" he whispered. "You let the fire breathe," she said. "You stop smothering. You stop controlling. You stop protecting yourself from yourself. You let one feeling through, just one, and you let it burn. Not forever, just long enough to remember that you are still alive, that you have always been alive, that the fire never went out. You just stopped feeding it air." He left the storefront with nothing but her words and a terror that felt, for the first time in years, like something other than numbness. That night, alone in his apartment, he sat on the floor and waited. For nothing. For something. He didn't know. And then, from somewhere deep, deeper than his control, deeper than his discipline, deeper than the wall he'd spent a lifetime building, a single tear escaped. Then another. Then a sob that came from a place he didn't know existed, a place that had been waiting, decades long, for permission to speak. He wept for 3 hours, not continuously, but in waves. Each wave brought something different. Grief for a childhood he'd never been allowed to have, rage at the systems that had trained him to perform, longing for connection he'd never learned to ask for, fear that it was too late to become real. And when the waves finally subsided, he sat in the aftermath and noticed something remarkable. The numbness was gone. In its place was not joy, not peace, not anything he would have called positive. In its place was simply sensation, aliveness, the raw, unfiltered experience of being a body with a heart that could still feel. He understood in that moment that the opposite of depression is not happiness. The opposite of depression is aliveness. And aliveness includes everything: the pain, the joy, the grief, the love, the fear, the hope. All of it. Every feeling he'd been running from was simply life trying to live through him. And by letting it live, he had come back from the dead. These stories are not separate from yours. They are mirrors. In the woman by the ocean, you may see your own unwept tears. In the man in the city, you may see your own carefully constructed walls. In both, you may see the universal human journey from resistance to acceptance, from control to surrender, from numbness to aliveness. Because here is the truth that all the parables point to. Your emotional life is not something to be solved. It is something to be lived. It is not a problem to fix. It is an experience to have. It is not an enemy to defeat. It is a lover to embrace, messy, unpredictable, sometimes terrifying, but ultimately the most intimate relationship you will ever know. The mystics speak of the dark night of the soul, a period of spiritual desolation that precedes profound transformation. But what if the dark night is not something to get through? What if it is something to enter? What if the darkness itself is holy? What if the grief itself is sacred? What if the anger itself is a form of prayer? In the Celtic tradition, there is a concept called the thin place, a location where the veil between worlds grows thin, where the seen and unseen touch. But what if your own emotional life is the thinnest place of all? What if your tears are the veil? What if your rage is the boundary dissolving? What if your fear is the threshold you've been seeking your whole life? The great poet Rumi wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." He didn't say the healing is where light enters. He didn't say the joy is where light enters. He said the wound, the broken place, the place that hurts. That is the doorway. Your most painful emotions are not your enemies. They are your thin places.
They are where the divine can touch you because your defenses are down. They are where transformation can happen because your illusions are shattered. They are where you can become real because the performance has finally exhausted itself. Think of the most emotionally difficult moments of your life, not the minor irritations, but the great devastations, the losses that leveled you, the betrayals that broke you, the failures that finished you. Now look back with honest eyes. Were those moments only destruction, or were they also, in some strange and terrible way, creation? Did they not strip away what was false? Did they not reveal what truly mattered? Did they not, in the end, make you more of who you actually are rather than less? This is the alchemy of emotional mastery. Not turning lead into gold, that's too simple. It's turning lead into more lead, but lead that knows it is lead. It's turning grief into more grief, but grief that is fully felt. It's turning fear into more fear, but fear that is no longer running the show because it has been seen, acknowledged, and allowed to simply be. The philosopher Kierkegaard said, "Life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards." This is the emotional journey in a single sentence. You cannot understand your feelings while you're in them, not fully. You can only live them forward, allow them to move through you, trust that on the other side there will be understanding. But the understanding never comes to those who refuse to live through. It only comes to those who stay present, who remain conscious, who keep their hearts open even when everything in them wants to close. So here you are, standing at the edge of your own ocean, sitting in the room with your own numbness. The question is not whether you will feel. You already do, whether you acknowledge it or not. The question is whether you will feel consciously, whether you will meet your emotions as a friend meets a friend, whether you will stop running long enough to discover that what you've been fleeing has been trying to lead you home your entire life.
The stories have been told. The concepts have been explored. The veil between you and your emotional life has grown thin. But now comes the question that separates philosophy from transformation. What do you actually do with all of this? How do you take the wisdom of the ocean and the alchemist and the thin places and apply it to a Tuesday afternoon? How do you integrate cosmic insight into a traffic jam, a difficult conversation with your partner, a moment of fear before a presentation, a wave of grief that rises without warning in the middle of a grocery store? This is the sacred work of practical integration. This is where the mystical becomes mundane, not in the sense of becoming ordinary, but in the sense of becoming earthly, becoming embodied, becoming real in the actual moments of your actual life. Let us descend now into the territory of application. Let us explore how emotional mastery transforms the 12 dimensions of your existence, not as abstract categories, but as living, breathing realities you navigate every single day. The body as temple, health, fitness, and vitality. Your body is not a vehicle you drive. It is the ground of all experience. Every emotion you process or fail to process registers somewhere in your physical form. The shoulders that carry the weight of unspoken words, the jaw that clenches against unexpressed anger, the chest that tightens around unfelt grief, the gut that churns with unacknowledged fear. This is the sacred work of practical integration. This is where the mystical becomes mundane, not in the sense of becoming ordinary, but in the sense of becoming earthly, becoming embodied, becoming real in the actual moments of your actual life. Several times daily, pause and ask, what am I feeling in my body right now? Where is there tension? Where is there warmth? Where is there numbness? This is not about fixing what you find. It is about noticing, because what you notice can move, what you ignore cannot. When you feel a wave of emotion rising, whether in response to a situation or seemingly from nowhere, bring your attention to the physical sensation. Is it hot or cold?
tight or expansive, pulsing or still? Does it have a color, a texture, a shape? Then breathe into it, not to make it go away, but to meet it with presence. Imagine your breath as a gentle current moving toward that sensation, surrounding it with awareness, holding it without trying to change it. This is the foundation of emotional mastery in the body, not forcing feelings to leave, but creating conditions where they can move through naturally. Over time, this practice transforms your relationship with physical sensation. You become less reactive to discomfort, more capable of being present with what is. And in that presence, healing happens, not as something you do, but as something you allow. The heart as compass, emotional life and relationships. Your emotions are not just internal weather, they are the primary language of your relationships. Every connection you have with partners, children, friends, colleagues is mediated through the emotional field between you. Here is a practical truth that will transform your relationships. Most conflicts are not about what they appear to be about. They are about unexpressed feelings seeking expression. They are about unmet needs communicating through frustration. They are about the gap between what you feel and what you're able to say. The next time you find yourself in conflict, pause. Before defending your position, before explaining your perspective, before winning the argument, ask yourself, what am I actually feeling right now? Not thinking, feeling. Is there fear beneath my anger? Is there grief beneath my criticism? Is there longing beneath my withdrawal? Then, if possible, share that, not as a weapon, but as an offering. I'm realizing that underneath my frustration, I'm actually feeling scared about this. I think my criticism is coming from a place of hurt because this. I've been withdrawing because I feel overwhelmed and don't know how to ask for what I need. This is vulnerability, and vulnerability is not weakness. It is the only path to genuine intimacy. When you share your actual emotional experience, you give others permission to share theirs. You create a space where truth can live, and in that space, relationships transform from transactions into sacred connections. The mind as witness, intellectual life and clarity. Your thinking mind is not separate from your emotional life. They are partners in the dance of consciousness. And when emotions go unacknowledged, they don't disappear. They simply migrate into your thoughts, masquerading as truth. This is where so much suffering begins. An unacknowledged fear becomes, I'm not safe. An unacknowledged grief becomes, nothing matters. An unacknowledged anger becomes, everyone is against me. The emotion drives the thought, but because you haven't recognized the emotion, you believe the thought is reality. The practice here is discrimination. When a thought arises that feels heavy, contracted, or absolute, pause and ask, is this thought true or is this thought carrying emotion? Not to dismiss the thought, but to see it clearly. A thought carrying fear is different from a thought arising from clarity. A thought carrying grief is different from a thought arising from wisdom. Learn to recognize the difference. Let thoughts that carry emotion be honored for what they are, messengers, without being mistaken for ultimate truth. Let them speak, thank them for their message, and then return your attention to the present moment where life is actually happening. Over time, this practice creates mental clarity. The noise of unprocessed emotion no longer masquerades as truth. Your mind becomes a clearer instrument, capable of perceiving reality with less distortion. And from that clarity, better decisions arise naturally. The spine as integrity, character, discipline, and courage. Emotional mastery is not about becoming a passive recipient of every passing feeling. It is about developing the capacity to choose your response rather than being controlled by your impulses. And this requires something that cannot be borrowed or bought: character. Character is built in the small moments. The moment when you feel irritation rising and choose to respond with patience.
The moment when you feel fear contracting and choose to act anyway. The moment when you feel the pull of distraction and choose to remain present with difficulty. These are not insignificant. They are the training ground of the soul. Every time you choose response over reaction, you strengthen a neural pathway. Every time you meet discomfort with presence rather than avoidance, you build emotional muscle. Every time you feel the full weight of a difficult emotion without numbing or escaping, you deepen your capacity to be with what is. This is courage, not the absence of fear, but the willingness to feel fear and act in alignment with your values anyway. This is discipline, not the suppression of feeling, but the channeling of feeling into chosen direction. This is integrity, not the perfection of emotional experience, but the honest acknowledgement of whatever is present.
The soul as journey, spirituality and awakening. Your emotional life is not separate from your spiritual life. They are the same river flowing through different terrain. The same energy that rises as grief in one moment rises as prayer in another. The same current that manifests as fear in one context manifests as reverence in another. The spiritual journey is not about transcending emotion. It is about including emotion in your wholeness. It is about discovering that the witness of your feelings is not itself a feeling, that there is a space of awareness within you that can hold any emotion without being consumed by it. This is the awakening the mystics describe, the realization that you are not your emotions, but the awareness in which emotions appear. Not in the sense of dissociation or detachment, but in the sense of intimacy without identification. You feel fully, completely, without holding back, and simultaneously you know yourself as the one who feels, not merely the feeling itself. Practice this in meditation. Sit quietly and allow whatever emotions are present to arise. Don't try to change them. Don't try to hold on to them. Simply notice them as events in the field of awareness, arriving, staying for a time, and eventually passing. Notice that you remain. The emotions come and go, but the awareness that notices them does not come and go. It is always here. This is your true nature, not a feeling, not a thought, not an experience, but the one who experiences. And from this recognition, even the most difficult emotions lose their power to consume you. They are still felt, perhaps intensely, but they are no longer mistaken for who you are. The hands as creators, career, finance, and conscious wealth. Your emotional life shapes your material reality in ways both subtle and profound. The fears you haven't faced become ceilings on your income. The grief you haven't processed becomes resistance to success. The anger you haven't expressed becomes burnout in your career. This is not mystical woo, it's practical psychology. Unprocessed emotions consume energy. They create cognitive load. They generate stress responses that impair decision-making. They drive unconscious behaviors that sabotage your best intentions. The path to conscious wealth and meaningful career is paved with emotional honesty. Before you can create outward abundance, you must address inward lack. Not lack of resources, but lack of presence with what is. The scarcity mindset that limits your earning is not a logical position. It's an emotional state masquerading as truth. The imposter syndrome that undermines your leadership is not an accurate assessment. It's fear wearing the costume of humility. The practice here is to meet these emotional patterns with awareness. When you notice scarcity thoughts arising, pause and ask, what am I feeling right now beneath this thought? Often you'll find fear, fear of failure, fear of success, fear of being seen, fear of not being enough.
And when you meet that fear with presence rather than resistance, it loses its grip. The thought loosens, the pattern softens, and from that softened place, new possibilities emerge. The legacy as gift, parenting, relationships, and generational healing. Here is a truth that will either break your heart or set you free. Your children will feel what you cannot feel. Your partners will carry what you cannot carry. Your relationships will express what you cannot express. Emotional patterns don't die with you. They are passed down through generations, not through genes alone, but through the invisible architecture of family systems. The grief your grandmother couldn't feel becomes the depression your mother carried, which becomes the anxiety you experience, which will become something in your children unless you do the work of healing. This is not blame. This is not guilt. This is simply the truth of how emotional energy moves through systems. And it carries with it an extraordinary opportunity. You can be the one who stops the cycle. Every time you feel a difficult emotion fully instead of passing it on, you heal something that extends backward and forward in time. Every time you name what was previously unnameable in your family system, you create space for those who come after you to live more freely. Every time you choose presence over projection, you shift the trajectory of generations. This is the deepest work of emotional mastery, not just for yourself, but for all those who came before and all those who will come after. You are not only healing your own emotional life, you are healing your bloodline. The moment as gift, quality of life, and inner freedom. Finally, we arrive at the most practical application of all, the quality of your everyday experience. Your ability to be present with your emotions determines your capacity for joy, gratitude, and inner freedom more than any external circumstance. Think of the last truly joyful moment you experienced. Chances are it wasn't complicated. It was simple. A sunset, a laugh with someone you love, a moment of unexpected beauty. And in that moment, you weren't fighting your experience. You weren't resisting what was. You were fully present, fully alive, fully here. This is available to you far more often than you realize. The only thing standing between you and this quality of presence is your relationship with your own emotional experience. When you're not busy running from discomfort, you're free to receive joy. When you're not exhausted from suppressing pain, you have energy for delight. When you're not caught in endless internal warfare, peace becomes your natural state. The quality of your life is not determined by what happens to you. It is determined by what happens in you and your capacity to be with whatever that is. Emotional mastery is not about creating a life without difficulty. It is about creating a self that can meet difficulty with presence, meet joy without grasping, meet loss without collapsing, meet love without defense. This is inner freedom, and it is available to you now, in this moment, regardless of your circumstances. A simple practice to begin. Before we close this section, let me offer you a practice you can begin today. It's simple enough to remember, profound enough to transform your life. 3 times a day, morning, afternoon, evening, pause for 60 seconds. Close your eyes if possible. Take 3 deep breaths. Then ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? Don't analyze, don't judge, don't try to change anything. Simply notice. Name the emotion if you can. Anger, sadness, fear, joy, grief, longing, peace, restlessness, whatever's present. Notice where it lives in your body. Notice its qualities. Breathe into it. Then thank it for being there. Not sarcastically, genuinely. Your emotions are trying to serve you, even the difficult ones. They are messengers. They deserve acknowledgement. Then open your eyes and continue your day. That's it. 60 seconds, 3 times a day. Over weeks and months, this simple practice will rewire your relationship with your entire emotional life. You'll become more aware, less reactive, more capable of being with whatever arises. And from that capacity, everything else will flow.
And so we arrive here, at the threshold between understanding and embodiment, between knowledge and wisdom, between the map and the territory itself. You have traveled through concepts and stories, through practical applications and ancient truths. You have stood at the edge of oceans and sat in the rooms of alchemists. You have seen yourself in the woman who wept and the man who numbed. And now, the question that remains is not what do I know, but who will I become? Because this is the truth that all the sages, all the mystics, all the philosophers across every tradition have pointed toward. Knowledge is not transformation. You can read every book, watch every video, understand every concept, and still find yourself years later standing in the same place, wrestling with the same demons, running from the same feelings, hiding behind the same walls. Transformation requires something more than understanding. It requires embodiment. It requires the courage to take what you've learned and live it, not perfectly, not all at once, but incrementally, imperfectly, humanly. It requires showing up day after day, moment after moment, and choosing presence over resistance, feeling over numbing, honesty over performance. This is the hero's journey, not the journey outward into adventure and conquest, but the journey inward into the landscape of your own soul. And like all heroes' journeys, it has a call, a summons, an invitation that cannot be ignored once it has been heard. You have heard that call now, in these words, in these stories, in the quiet spaces between the sentences. Something has been speaking to you. Not me, I am merely the messenger. Something deeper, something older, something that has been waiting for your attention your entire life. It is the part of you that knows the truth about your emotions, the part that has always known that your tears are sacred, your anger is information, your fear is a guide, your grief is a doorway. The part that has watched you run and hide and suppress and numb and has never stopped waiting for you to turn around and say, I'm ready now. I'm ready to feel. That moment is now. Not because these words have convinced you, but because they have reminded you. They have reminded you of what you've always known, beneath all the conditioning and coping and cultural programming. They have called you back to yourself. The integration of all dimensions. Let us now weave together all the threads we have explored so you can see the wholeness of what is being offered. Your emotional life is not separate from your physical health. Every feeling you process is energy moving through your body, and every feeling you suppress becomes tension, becomes illness, becomes the slow erosion of vitality. When you learn to feel fully, you learn to live fully. Your body becomes not a battleground, but a temple, not a prison, but a home. Your emotional life is not separate from your relationships. Every connection you long for is mediated through the emotional field between you and others. When you learn to be honest about what you feel, you learn to be honest with those you love. When you learn to hold your own emotional experience with compassion, you learn to hold others the same way. Your relationships become not transactions, but sacred encounters, not performances, but truth. Your emotional life is not separate from your work, your wealth, your purpose. Every fear you face becomes freedom you reclaim. Every grief you process becomes energy you recover. Every anger you honor becomes boundary you establish.
When you stop leaking energy into emotional suppression, that energy becomes available for creation, for contribution, for the work you came here to do. Your emotional life is not separate from your spiritual awakening. The same awareness that notices your breath, that observes your thoughts, that witnesses the world around you, this same awareness is what can hold your emotions without being consumed by them. And in that holding, you discover something extraordinary. You are not your feelings. You are the space in which feelings arise and pass away. You are the sky, not the weather. You are the ocean, not the wave. This is not dissociation. This is not detachment. It is intimacy with freedom, the capacity to feel everything while being defined by nothing. It is the realization that your true nature is not an emotion, not a thought, not an experience, but the one who experiences. And from this realization, even the most turbulent emotions become workable. They are still felt, perhaps intensely, but they no longer define you, no longer consume you, no longer control you. The invitation to begin. But here is the most important truth of all. You do not need to have this all figured out before you begin. In fact, you cannot. The only way to understand emotional mastery is to practice it. The only way to learn to feel is to feel. The only way to become free is to take the first step, and then the next, and then the next, without knowing exactly where the path leads. So let me offer you a beginning, a simple commitment you can make right here, right now, that will set everything in motion. For the next 7 days, I will pause 3 times daily and ask myself, what am I feeling right now? I will not judge it. I will not try to change it. I will simply notice it, name it, and breathe into it. I will thank it for being there, and then I will continue my day. That's it. 7 days, 3 pauses a day, less than 5 minutes total.
But in those 5 minutes, something will shift. You will begin to rebuild a relationship with yourself that may have been damaged for decades. You will start to remember that your emotions are not enemies, but allies. You will take the first steps on a journey that leads ultimately to the only destination worth reaching, your own wholeness. And at the end of those 7 days, you can choose to continue or not. The choice is always yours, but at least you will have chosen from awareness rather than from habit. At least you will have tasted what it feels like to be present with yourself. At least you will have opened a door that can never be fully closed again. A final parable. There's a story told in many traditions about a seeker who traveled the world looking for enlightenment. He climbed mountains and crossed deserts, studied with masters and sat in caves, accumulated techniques and teachings and transmissions. After decades of searching, he returned to his home village, not enlightened, but exhausted, disillusioned, convinced that the truth he sought did not exist. As he walked through the village, he passed an old woman sitting by the well. She was simply there, drawing water, present in a way that stopped him in his tracks. Something about her stillness, her ordinariness, her complete lack of striving, it was unlike anything he had encountered in all his years of seeking. He approached her and asked, "What is your secret? How have you found such peace?" She looked at him with ancient eyes and said, "When I feel sad, I am sad. When I feel happy, I am happy. When I feel afraid, I am afraid. When I feel peaceful, I am peaceful. I do not add anything to my experience. I do not take anything away. I simply allow what is to be what is." The seeker waited for more, but there was no more. The old woman picked up her water jar and walked back toward the village, leaving him standing by the well with the simplest teaching he had ever received and the most profound. I do not add anything to my experience.
I do not take anything away. I simply allow what is to be what is. This is emotional mastery, not the absence of feeling, but the fullness of feeling without resistance, not the transcendence of emotion, but the inclusion of emotion in wholeness, not the control of experience, but the surrender to experience as it actually is. You have everything you need for this. The capacity to feel is already here. The awareness that witnesses is already here. The courage to be present is already here, waiting for your choice to activate it. The only question is, will you choose? The transformational call. So here it is, the call. Not to become someone else, but to become more fully who you already are. Not to escape your emotional life, but to enter it more deeply. Not to transcend your humanity, but to inhabit it more completely. If these words have stirred something within you, if you felt a resonance, a recognition, a quiet knowing that this is true, then carry that with you, not as a burden, but as a gift, not as another thing to get right, but as a permission slip to be real. Reflect on what you've received here. Sit with it. Let it settle into the places that have been waiting for exactly this recognition. And then, when you're ready, begin. Not tomorrow, not someday, not when conditions are perfect, but now, in this moment, with whatever you're feeling right this second. Because that feeling, the one you're experiencing as you read these final words, is your teacher. It is your guide. It is your doorway, and it has been waiting for you to notice it your entire life. This is the beginning of your next chapter. Not because you've finished something, but because you've started something. Not because you've arrived, but because you're finally willing to journey. Not because you have all the answers, but because you're finally ready to ask the right questions. The secret power of your emotions is not that they will make you feel good all the time. The secret power is that they will make you real all the time. And in that realness, you will discover something more valuable than happiness, more enduring than pleasure, more profound than any temporary state. You will discover yourself. Not the self you've been performing, not the self you've been protecting, not the self you've been pretending to be, but the self you actually are, the one that has been there all along, waiting beneath all the layers of conditioning and coping, waiting for you to stop running long enough to turn around and say, "Oh, there you are. You've been here the whole time." Yes, you have. And now you know. If this stirred something within you, carry it, reflect on it, live it, subscribe and return often. Every word here is designed to awaken the clarity and power already within you. This is the beginning of your next chapter.